So in this part, each code block below is going to be a separate program. And for each question, you are to read the code block, pretend that you're Python, and write down what will print out in the lined box under the code. So on the handwritten version, there will be a lined box under each code block. Okay, so if there's more than one print command, or if there's a print command inside a loop, as you guys know, Python will print out those separately on separate lines. Okay, so you're going to write them down on separate lines as well, exactly like Python would do. Do not include anything in that lined box that will not print out. If there's going to be an error, you can just write error. You don't have to write like what the actual error message would be because nobody has those memorized. For scratch work, you can put it anywhere else on the page. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some questions that require you to know about operations, types, and the length function. Okay, so the first one, print 40 over 40. So basically here I'm just expect you to know that it is going to print out with in a float format. So the type of the result is going to be float. So 40 divided by 4 is 10, but since it is going to become a float, it will be 10.0 is actually what's going to print out. So make sure we run it to get the same result. Yeah, 10.0. Okay, for the next one, we're multiplying two integers together. If you multiply two integers, the result is going to be another integer. So this one will just be 40, there's no 0.0. The next one, 3 over 2. So whenever you divide, regardless of whether the answer is, whether the mathematical answer would be an integer or whether it would have some decimals, when you divide in Python, the answer will always be a float. So this will be 1.5, which is a float. It'll print just like that. The next one, 1.0 is a float, not an integer. Okay, and 2 is an integer. When you add an integer and a float, the result will be a float. Okay, so this will be 3.0. The next one is making sure you remember what the percent sign does. So percent is the remainder after division. So this does 10 divided by 3, and then the remainder after doing 10 divided by 3 is 3 goes into 10 3 times, and there's 1 left over. So the remainder is 1. And the result of the percent is always an integer. So we just get 1, not 1.0. The next one is related to the last one. So when you do long division, this is how many times does 7 go into 10 when you're doing long division. So you're not doing any decimals or remainder or anything, just how many times does it go in whole. So 7 goes into 10 one time, and that's what you're going to get, 1. All right, so it's the integer part of long division. The next one, the 2 stars, that is exponent. So this is actually 3 squared. So it's going to be 9. And since these were both integers, the result comes out as an integer as well. The next one, a float times an integer, is going to come out as a float. Regardless of whether it needed to be a float or not, it will come out as a float. That's just how Python does it. So if you put a float and an integer together into one operation, like integer plus float, integer times float, integer divide by float, it'll always come out as a float, except for these operations up here that will come out as integers. Anyway, so 1.5 times 2, let's see, 1.5 of 2 is going to be 3, I think. So this will be 3.0 because we have a float here for one of the arguments. Now this one is a little bit tricky, so I'm trying to trick you here. This is not 5 because this is a string and this is an integer. You cannot add an integer to a string. So this is going to give us an error. Yep. Now the next one, again, trying to trick you, it's not 3. This is going to be a string. So when you add 2 strings to each other, it just glues them together or concatenates them. So this is going to be the string containing 1, 2. So it comes out looking like 12, but it's actually a string. The string containing the characters 1, 2. Now here again, I'm just trying to trick you. So I've got the strings 1 and 2, but then I'm converting them to integers. So this is converting the string 1 to an integer. So this is going to be integer 1. And then this is going to be the integer 2. So if I add the integer 1 to the integer 2, I do get the integer 3. Right. Next one, if I multiply an integer times a string, this actually does work. But what it does is it concatenates the string however many times the integer is. So this is going to glue 5 together with itself 3 times. So 5, 5, 5. All right. Next one, this is a list. So you might have forgotten how these list operations work, but if I do 3 times a list, it is going to do basically the same thing it does for a string. It's going to glue that list together with itself 3 times. So I'm going to have a list with 3 entries, each of which is 5, like this. Okay. Now, if I add two lists together, that is again concatenation, so it is gluing the two lists together. So I'm going to have a list that has two entries, 5, 2. Like that. The next one is just checking if you guys remember what the len length function does. So this is counting the number of characters in the string. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The next one is going to give us an error. You cannot add anything other than a list to a list. So that will give us an error. The next one, len of a list, is just going to return the number of entries in the list. So there's 3 entries in this list, and we get 3. And the last 3, making sure you know what the type function does. So this is going to print out the type of whatever is in here. So type returns the type, so like integer, string, float, list, etc. And then the way it prints it out is actually in these like angle brackets, and it says class and then the name of the type. So this one is going to look like this, I think, class list, because this empty brackets like this is a list. So it should look like that. Yep. The next one is going to be the same way, except it'll be class. I think it's just str, so string. So an empty quotes makes a string. And then the very last one is trying to trick you guys here again. So 6 is an integer, but then we convert it to a string. So the type after it's been converted to a string is, again, string. Okay. So make sure you know how those type answers are going to print out. All right, and now on to the next type of question.